we have the IMF World Bank meetings in Washington next week. A year ago, if you remember, it was just after Liberation Day. Now this time we have a shooting war instead of a trade war. How will that affect these meetings?
I think that at the beginning of the year, as people were getting ready for these meetings, what officials, finance ministers, central bankers were getting ready to talk about is global trade, how resilient is it, AI, what is the impact going to be on the world economy? I think those were probably the big issues. But with the war in Iran, that has now pushed everything off the agenda. And I think the central focus is going to be what is happening to the global economy. I think you're going to see, nervous is maybe the wrong word, but some very concerned finance ministers and central bankers. I spoke to one person who is a principal participant in these meetings. And I asked this person, I said, I want to talk about these meetings, what you're thinking, what you're getting ready for. And this person said to me, the first thing the person said is, I'm expletive deleted. So I think that gives you a sense of, the degree, I would say, of potential crisis that leaders are preparing to deal with.
Talk about the state of the global economy as far as we can see it right now. We see, for example, OECD estimates out where we're taking growth down, inflation up, and people at least are talking about stagflation, that dreaded term.
The concern that I would have if I were headed there as finance minister would be that there is a triple whammy that the world is facing right now. One, stagflation. That is hard enough to deal with. Two, it is coming at a time when the fiscal capacity of countries is really strained. Remember, COVID was not that long ago. And in addition to, treasuries having been depleted by COVID, governments are spending a lot on defense. So the money available to deal with a crisis is really, really not there in the way it was before. And then the third thing is, it's not just that there is a vacuum in leadership. There are a lot of fights going on. In 2008, the big global financial crisis, the G20 really rallied to pull the world through. During COVID, when I was finance minister, it was much more the G7. You'll remember that Russia invaded Ukraine early on in COVID, and that made the G20 much less effective. But the G7 really acted. Today, it's really hard to see where the leadership comes from. The G7 itself is deeply divided, and there are obviously deep divisions in the G20 between Russia and the NATO countries, between China and the United States.
It strikes me the IMF and the World Bank and other institutions like that were the essence of multilateralism coming out of World War II. And now, as you say, it's not so clear where the leadership comes from. I wonder whether they can even get together in the same room. I mean, you have the United States and Israel in one place, and you've got the rest of the West in another place. Before you get to China and Russia, I mean, what is the future of multilateral organizations in that sort of world?
Really, really rough. And, the IMF and the World Bank are not just multilateral institutions. At the end of the day, these are the Bretton Woods institutions that were created by U.S. leadership in the world. These were the institutions created as the Allies looked at the carnage, the destruction of World War II, and said, we have to build a world that works better. There's a great line from Dean Acheson that I love, where he said, we have to at least build a world that works for our half of the world, for the free world. And I know it's quite in vogue to criticize that US-led international order, but actually it worked pretty well. The time from World War II to today, certainly for North America, for Western Europe, has been a time of unprecedented peace and prosperity. And that is in part because of the Bretton Woods institutions. Now, what is unprecedented is that this order that America built these institutions that America was the leader in creating is being really wrecked by the country that created them, by the United States.
In another time, in another place, we would be talking about development, some of the less fortunate countries around the world and what they needed. When the big powers conflict, often it's the little guys who really take it in the neck, as it were. What's going on in Asia? What's going on in Africa as we see this war in Iran unfold?
That is a hugely important question. I hope that it is a question that we hear a lot of people talking about next week. The reality is that challenging as this moment in the global economy looks in Washington, in New York, in San Francisco, it is much, much worse in Asia, in Africa. These are the countries that depend on fuel coming through the Strait of Hormuz. They depend on fertilizer that comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And that is where you are really seeing the stagflation. Because in those countries, in addition to seeing higher prices, because energy has become much more expensive, you're also seeing governments acting to slow down the economy. You're seeing governments saying that people need to be working from home. You're seeing governments saying that people can't be driving their cars.
And that, of course, has major repercussions for countries that need to import oil and natural gas. But also, we've talked about fertilizer before. As you say, you're a farmer's daughter. You know this world of fertilizer. And it's one thing for April, which is critical in North America for planting. What about for the rest of the world, where the planting may come a little later? Could we be facing more than just higher prices? Could we be facing real food shortages?
100%. You know, the combination of fertilizer having a hard time getting through the Strait of Hormuz and also fuel prices translate very directly into higher food prices. It takes fuel, usually diesel fuel, to farm. So you're already seeing that. That is already a challenge right now for countries in Africa, for countries in Asia. I don't want to just talk about bad news. Something that is promising that is happening right now is the UN is involved in some negotiations trying to get a deal with Iran to allow fertilizer to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. There's some precedent there because a deal was done to allow commodities to pass through the Black Sea after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So that would be a piece of good news, first and foremost, for the countries of the global south, but for the whole world. So let's hope that the UN can do it. And, you know, it would be a sign that multilateral institutions can work.
Chrystia, let me impose on you for a moment. Put your old hat on as finance minister from Canada. If you were going to these meetings, what would be your goal? What do you think you might be able to accomplish in these meetings?
My goal this year would be to spend a lot of time, first and foremost, talking to having meetings within the G6. I'd be spending a lot of time talking to France. I think Macron's leadership right now is extraordinary. I think, by the way, my own Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is showing extraordinary leadership. I think we're seeing the UK stepping up, working hard on the Strait of Hormuz. I think the EU, Germany, Italy, all of those countries are playing an important role. I would say Spain is another country to watch. It has been a leader in saying it's time to say to the White House, enough is enough. And I think we're seeing a lot of European countries follow that advice. So if I were headed to the meetings, the personal thing that I would be planning and how I would start my remarks at the G7 finance minister and central bankers meeting would be by saying thank you to Jay Powell, thanking him for his leadership, thanking him for his integrity, thanking him for his courage. And I bet I'm not the only person thinking that. So I am pretty sure that behind closed doors, a lot of people are going to be congratulating him, wishing him well. And I wouldn't be surprised if you hear people saying that in public too. And I'd like to take this opportunity to say Thank you very much, Jay Powell. You're an example of American integrity. The world needs you more than ever.